Tonight, we're pleased to have a colleague of mine, Fred Reynolds, is going to be speaking on the postal history of World War I, Zeppelins, and combat operations. And I'm looking forward to it a lot. I mean, I'm not a super heavy Zeppelin guy, but I just get the sense that World War I Zeppelins has got to be fascinating, and we hear so little about it. So I'm really looking forward to having Fred talk.
Oh, thank you, David. Although this is my first presentation to your society, I want to acknowledge how much fun it's been working with your leadership and your members over the past 2 years at the Great American Stamp Show. I was honored to be among those volunteers staffing your booth. And it was so much fun to be able to meet so many energetic and interesting collectors working in so many different, often overlapping areas. And it was my first, and certainly not my last, opportunity to work with Ken Sanford. Secondly, it's been a real joy working alongside David as a member of the collaboration crew. The energy and foresight that he's displayed is a major ingredient in moving forward this important initiative. I'm honored to be here today to share what I know about this most interesting subject. And by the way, I'm a retired certified flight instructor. And when I first got my license a long time ago, I flew in a fabric-covered airplane, just like they did in World War I. And it had a wooden propeller and didn't have a starter. Somebody had to pull the prop through so that I could, it had two magnetos on it, so I could get that Hummer running. And when I did get a CFI rating, I did it in an aerobatic airplane. And my mentor was a World War II P-47 pilot, Jack Hayes. So let me start by explaining my most important mission tonight is for me to finish talking before you finish listening. Let's see if I can get that done. I got one administrative note. There'll be time at the end for questions and my contact information on that last slide. But at any time during the presentation, if a question or a clarification is helpful on keeping us all on track, why, just sound off. So here we are, World War I Zeppelin combat operations postal history, or everything you wanted to know about World War I Zeppelins, but were afraid to ask. So why this presentation? Well, several years ago, I caught a communicable disease from Dr. Cheryl Gantz. It's exceptionally contagious. It's not yellow fever or rheumatic fever, but the very dangerous Zeppelin fever. And once caught, you want to share it with everybody else. So here's a roadmap for this evening. 1, what's a Zeppelin? 2, overview of World War I combat operations. And I do that in 2 slides. And then some ideas about how to collect this most interesting area. I have several slides that are rhetorical questions. I don't expect you to answer them. This is just something to roll over in your mind. Here's a question. Where does the word Zeppelin come from? 1, is it the Greek word meaning fly like a bird? 2, the exotic South Seas bird of the same name? Or 3, a Prussian cavalry general? And now I need some kind of a tick-tock noise. Well, it's Ferdinand von Zeppelin. Ferdinand Adolf Heinrich August Graf von Zeppelin, born in 1838, died in 1917, that is prior to the end of World War I. So here he is. On the left, you can see him in the battle garb of I believe he was a brigadier general in the Prussian cavalry. Prussia, of course, one of the many states of Germany at that time. And on the right, now this is an interesting picture, so here's another one of these rhetorical questions. The picture on the left was taken in Prussia. I wonder, where was this picture taken on the right-hand side? The options are, was it in Hartford, Connecticut at last year's gas? Was it in Bavaria when he was a youth? Or was it in Virginia in 1863? Well, the answer is 1863. He was an observer in the American Civil War, and he had an opportunity to see some fledgling hot air and hydrogen balloon operations in the Army of the Potomac. So here's another question. Where did von Zeppelin get his first gas balloon ride? In Paris, France in 1854, London, England in 1859. Now you see how the answers are coming up? Or third, Fort Snelling, Minnesota in 1863. It was Fort Snelling, Minnesota. He went there in part because there was a local professor who was giving balloon rides, and he took his first ascent in a balloon that was powered by methane gas out of the city's lighting system. We know this because in the basket with him was not only the professor, but was the daughter of the governor of Minnesota at that time, whose diary recorded the event and was later published. So let's look at him as an individual. He retired from the Prussian cavalry in 1891, and he had this idea about military use of lighter than air airships. He made his first design in 1893, which was patented. His first flight was in LZ-1 in 1900. Notice LZ-1, they continue to be numbered in numerical sequence. You'll see that later. And he finally got German military support in 1909 because these ships are large, took a lot of money to make them, and he exhausted his funds and some local donations and needed the help of the German military to be able to keep making them. And down below is a picture of LZ-1. So what is a Zeppelin? A Zeppelin is a lighter than air craft or an airship, but they're distinctive because they have a rigid skeleton inside. Some, like a balloon, an observation balloon, doesn't have anything inside except hot air or hydrogen or methane. A Zeppelin has a skeleton, and the skeleton, here you can see it being worked on. I don't remember which one this is, but it's rigid inside, and the hydrogen is held in balloons that are subsections of this. So you can see, and the first Zeppelins were made of different types of aluminum. Duraluminum is what they used. But there are some aircraft very similar, and I'll show you examples, that were made of other products. You can get an idea of the size of this craft by the workman that's in the center of the picture. So this is not a World War I ship. This is one of the large commercial ships. But you can see that a Zeppelin or a rigid airship, or in the United States we call them dirigibles, is this skeleton, and around the skeleton is a skin, which is shown silver here, and inside is a keel that goes from one end to the other, shown in blue, and these big gas bags, which are shown in pink here, is the lifting gas. This is what actually pulls the craft into the air. But the streamlined shape protects the gas bags and makes it easier to steer. We're going to talk about three other types, but the Zeppelin was the main one. Now let's depart from Zeppelin and talk a little bit about World War I. Philatelists are closet historians anyway, so most of this is probably known by this audience. But World War I had the Allied powers, shown in the light brown, pitted against the Central powers, which are shown in the dark brown. And so the problem was that the Central powers were forced to fight on two fronts, and then they actually opened up a third front against the British when they went down into the Ottoman Empire. So this is the backdrop for the beginning of World War I. Now, I'm going to just summarize operations, and we'll get into a little bit of detail. But prior to the war, there were a lot of pre-war expectations. From about 1909 to 1914, on the onset of hostilities, there were all kinds of experiments all over Europe and some in the United States on lighter than aircraft and some heavier than aircraft. Particularly in Europe, there was this expectation that if war broke out, that Germany would have a real advantage in two new super combat machines. The one is a submarine, the other is the Zeppelin. Now, that was to some extent a propaganda item, and to some extent just what citizens that want to support their war effort began to talk about. But there was actually in Germany pre-war planning and mobilization about how there were a few commercial ships at that time, how to take the early airships commercial and bring them into the military as military machines. And then there were mobilization plans to build many of these machines, and to support the machines, you need air bases, you need hydrogen factories, you need weather stations. It's a huge undertaking. And there was mobilization. I actually have copies of one of the major mobilization papers that's focused just on the lighter than air craft. When war broke out, the early results were most unsatisfactory. Zeppelins are really very fragile, and at that time, they flew entirely too low to be protected. They flew low enough that machine guns and artillery, even rifle fire, could be very dangerous. And the many ships were lost. When Germany started, they only had 6 ships. Some of them converted from commercial operations, and they lost almost all of them. So from the German side, they changed their equipment and they changed their tactics. They changed their equipment by building larger Zeppelins, larger rigid airships that could fly higher so that they could stay out of the, and by staying higher, they could also avoid some of the most unsatisfactory weather. And so their tactics were to change from being low-flying aircraft flying over the battlefield looking for their enemies to a more strategic type of weapon that flew higher and could range longer. Gradually, this changed to a strategic initiative that resulted in the London raids. There were a whole series of raids, mostly in 15 and 16, where major forces of Zeppelins and one other aircraft were launched to bomb London. And actually, it wasn't London. They started at Portsmouth and a lot of other areas. The idea was to disrupt the supplies in London, in England, and hopefully demoralize the London. Not as well known, but probably more energetic. There were Zeppelins used on the east and southern fronts as well. And I'll cover that very briefly. In 1917, and the Zeppelins and all lighter than air ships in the German military were in 2 military departments, the Navy and the Army. That's just like the United States. At that time, we had a Secretary of the Navy and we had a Secretary of War. There was no Secretary of the Army in the United States until 1947. So in most empires and democracies, you had one person who ran the naval operations and another that ran the ground operations. And that was the case in Germany. In 1917, the Army decided that this was just too risky. It was taking too many resources and wasn't really resulting in appreciable results. And so they stopped using Zeppelins and they transferred the ones they had left to the Navy. The Navy used them for a while, and eventually the program was discontinued in early 1918. So in one slide, I've covered 2.5 years of work and all of the military operations of lighter than aircraft. So let's take a look at these pre-war expectations. Here, this is a postcard. By the way, everything shown in here is in my collection. So this is a postcard. The Kaiser is displayed prominently in the center. And over there to the left, you can see submarines. This is the U-9. The U-9 was famous. It sank 3 armored cruisers in one afternoon just off the coast of England. Just an amazing feat. On the right, you can see stylized Zeppelins or rigid airships bombing. In this case, it looks like a military or perhaps a population center. So this was the expectation, and there was a propaganda slogan to go with it, Gott strafe England, which means God will punish England. Obviously, this is German propaganda. So the Navy's concept is Zeppelin high above, destroyers out front, across the center with the black and gray and white smoke are cruisers, and behind them in black smoke and with their names down below are battle cruisers and battleships. So the idea is the Zeppelin is high enough they can see the enemy and they can guide the admiral in closing with and defeating the enemy. For the for the Army, it was similar in that because the German Army had to operate on 2 fronts, attacking into France and attacking into the Russian Empire, that in the German Army, the Zeppelins would operate as cavalry. So they would stretch out in front of the advancing divisions sweeping through France, and they would be able to identify the British, the French, and the Belgium units and guide the general in being victorious. And so that's the way it started out. And as I explained to you earlier, it really wasn't as successful as they would have liked. And operations were suspended by the Army and then completely abandoned by the Navy. So that means that you're collecting stuff that happened over about a 2.5-year time period. How do you collect this stuff? Well, there's many options. Here are some of the categories. You can collect it by ship type and or number, and I'm going to show you the 4 ship types and the cancels they have and the way the numbers are shown on them. You can collect support organizations. To run this big military machine, they had to have weather stations, hydrogen factories, construction units to build support units, and even individual hangar support units. You could focus on, so you can collect these organizations. You can collect mail that was posted by the crews. I'll show you those. Drop mail. Sometimes a soldier or sailor is flying over his girlfriend's house and he drops these are mostly postcards or an envelope overboard. And they're very difficult to find, but they exist. There were seals. There's a reverse seal. I'll show you examples of them. And they're collected both used and unused. Some people focus on the London Raiders. They just collect mail from the ships that were bombing England. You can focus on the different fronts, the East Front, the West Front, the Balkan fronts. You can collect the propaganda cards. There were a certain group, 4 ships that were civilian that were converted to military. Some collect those. Human interest, this is mostly my category. It's the idea of men at war. These young commanders of these ships were about the same age I was when I first went to war in Vietnam, and they were worrying about the same problems that sometimes kept me awake at night. You can collect the balloons, which were mostly in the Army. They're for observation to guide artillery fire. There's the German reparations. At the end of the war, Germany was punished by having to pay financial reparations and also by providing ships to 4 of the belligerents. You can collect it as military mail. There's Feldpost, that's like the US APO, or Shift Post, which is like the American FPO. And I'm going to show you some resources. So I'm going to show some of these types and resources you can use to collect the stuff. Cancels and seals. Almost all of the cancels were issued in the name of a commander. So it says commando, and this is pretty uniform. The commander of the ship had the authority to post mail and to censor mail. And this was, and he delegated this. And so this says, this is a letter cancel for Commando Z, so it's a Zeppelin, number 11. This is about as clear as it can get. On the other side, on the right, is a Luft Air Shift ship, and a troop is like a company. This is a 15th company supporting a particular Zeppelin or a particular location. I'll show you some examples of them. So here on the left is a commando cancel made by the authority of the captain. This one has a name. This is a Sachin. This is a commercial ship that was taken into the military, into the German army, and run by army troops. On the other side is one from LZ-87. So the one on the left has a name, the one on the right has a number. This is LZ-87, and there in the middle is the famous Prussian Eagle. Some of these are very attractive, and they were applied very carefully. Most of the cancels are easy to read. So if you want to collect Feldpost or APOs, that's shown on the left-hand side. And most of these are numbered, as this one is. This is Feldpost number 209. Some of them were stationary. Often they moved with the troops. On the right-hand side is the Royal Prussian Airship Battalion number 4, and it's in Mannheim. This is one of the seals. They had adhesive on the back, and so they're very much like a postage stamp. Some are very attractive. So there's a really simple means of identifying all this stuff. All the ships are Luftschiff, airships. They're manufactured, if they're manufactured by Zeppelins, they have two numbers. They have a production number, Z1, 2, 3, 4. They go all the way up through Z130. That's the last one that they built just before World War II. The military designation is broken down. If it's Army, the cancel is going to say Z or LZ. That's all there is. If it's Navy, it's L, and that's all there is. And it's followed by a number. So those three numbers are found on all the mostly postcards. The only thing to note, if you decide to pick up some of this stuff, Luftschiff just means airship, and there were hundreds, maybe thousands of balloon units, and they say Luftschiff on them also. Sometimes I'll have a dealer offer me ship, and it's just from a balloon, and a cancel from a balloon unit is probably worth $8. So now let's go to the types of ship. Here's a Zeppelin. This is what it looks like, as I showed you earlier from a stylized picture. This is LZ 102. That's a manufacturer number. It's an L, which means it's Navy, 57. And that was usually on the nose someplace. But you can see it looks kind of like a cigar. And after the first quarter, it's the same diameter all the way until it necks down at the tail. Aerodynamically, this is not a very good design, but this was what most of the airships were. This is a piece of mail from the ship I just showed you. It's L57. It's crew mail, L57. And you can see down here in the lower left, here's the Commando cancel, L57. And it's really crisp. It's really easy to read. And this happens to be from the, and this is addressed to Frau. It's the wife. It's the wife of the sender above. It's Mrs. Marta Merkel. This is an interesting piece of mail because inside is a sheet of music because paper was hard to get a hold of. Whoever was sending the envelope made the envelope and put the letter inside, and it's a folded sheet of music. I'm a musician, so this really caught my eye. So here's another one. This is the last one was crew mail. This is crew mail also. This is Commando LZ-97. LZ means it's Army. And down in the lower left, you can see the cancel. Commando, the commander's cancel for LZ. LZ means it's Army ship. The last one was Navy. This is Army. And below that is Heersache, which means this is Army material. And some of these went through military post offices. This one was posted at the local, this is in Belgium. This is occupied territory. So in the upper right, you can see that it was in the occupied territories. Namur in this case, which is a really big Zeppelin base. And this is to Fraulein. So this is probably to a girlfriend. And this happens to be from the commander. Up there is, it's from Lennartz, who was a captain in the German army. And on the back, probably to impress his girlfriend, he put 5 of these beautiful reverse cancels. And some of them are very pretty. Most of them are blue, some are green, some are red. They make great exhibits. Whether he was successful in catching the eye of his girlfriend, I don't know. I do have covers from commanders who their girlfriend later became their wife. This is a second type. It's a rigid aircraft, but it's made by Schutt-Lanz. It's not Zeppelin. It's not the Zeppelin company. And their airships look very similar, but they're more streamlined. The airship, after about the first third, as you're going from right to left, narrows slightly. It's more aerodynamically efficient. So Schutt-Lanz, they were a competitor. They only made 22 of these in World War I. Zeppelin made 120. They were distinctive in that they weren't made out of metal. They were made out of laminated wood, and which made them very light, just like aluminum. They had some problems because at altitude, when dew would form inside the ship, this laminated wood would tend to delaminate and lessen in strength. I don't know of any ships that failed and crashed because of delamination, but the Navy particularly didn't like them. So here's a cancel, upper left-hand side. Commando, it says, commander, and it's SL, Schutt-Lanz. So Z means it was made by Zeppelin. SL means it was manufactured by Schutt-Lanz. And this is ship number 13. And it went into civil mail. So it started out as a military mail and then went into the civilian mail, went through Leipzig. Here's a third type, a Parseval. Parseval was a major in the German army and a tinkerer. And before World War I, he designed and flew this type of an airship. And this went into the military also. The military only used 4 of these particular types. So the Z Zeppelin envelopes are the most common. Schutt-Lanz is probably the next most common. This is a little harder to find, but exists also. This is the front demonstrating this ship. I don't see the date on here. This is probably pre-war. And then here's the other side, and it's from the airship commander. It's P for Parseval, number 4. And there's the Prussian Eagle, and it's an airship commando, P Parseval, number 4. And the strikes are all mostly this clear. It's pretty easy material to find. The 4th one is a Gross Backenbach. It's a semi-rigid. Up above is this, by the way, the Parseval it didn't have any frame inside at all. It's just inflated by oxygen, by air and hydrogen. The Gross Bossenbach was inflated with hydrogen inside, but also had some air balloons to round it out. But this is called semi-rigid because from left to right, those white sections, that's metal, aluminum, that essentially constructs a keel underneath the aircraft. This one, there was only one type made. Gross Bossenbach made several, but only one was militarized. And this is the cancel of that particular ship. And you can see as you go around the clock at about 4 o'clock, you can see M. It was called a militaire airship instead of the name of the manufacturer. And this is number 4. These are very hard to find. I only have one in my collection, and I haven't even seen another one. Support troops. So in the cancels, you'll see these words. It's a troop, which means a company, about 120 men, a battalion, which is a detachment or a battalion, maybe 600 men, a school. The Army and the Navy each established 2 schools to train people how to fly these Hummers. And then you can have a base. You can have a base commander. That's called a Hafen, and that's a base. And there's those kind of cancels. There are cancels from the weather stations because it was important to know what the weather was going to look like when you lift off in Germany or Belgium and you're headed for London. And there were also construction units that had to go out and build these new air bases and these hangars. It was a huge military organization. So here's an example of a Luftschiff airship troop. This is a support unit. This is number 15. There are, let's see, they're numbered, serially numbered. I think the largest number is number 22. Here's troop number 15 on the other side of the postcard. This is the leadership of the troop. Poor little donkey. I'm sure this was done as a novelty shot. However, the commander, who was a captain, Army captain, is seated there prominently in the on the left-hand side with the shiny boots. And I don't know the name of the donkey. So here's another one. Here's a detachment. The red stamp, this is a Marine stamp, which means it's Navy, and it's from a detachment. And there are catalogs that show these. So this one's got 2 identifications. It has a red circular cancel, and then inside a rectangle is the designation of that unit. This is so interesting. This is from a sailor writing to his girlfriend, and down below it says, "I came, I saw, I conquered." In other words, this is a sailor. This sailor is sending this to his girlfriend, explaining that in his mind, and she's wearing his cap, in his mind, she came and she saw, and conquered his heart. There's a lot of really touching stuff like this. Youth that goes to war is very much like that. So here's a battalion. This is the same one I showed earlier. This is the Royal Prussian Airship Battalion number 4. And the battalions are numbered sequentially. And there are a list of where the battalions were. This one's clear. This battalion was in Mannheim. Here's a school seal. This is the school of the airship troops. This is a school that the leaders went to learn how to take care of the airship when it was on the ground and walk it out and launch it into the air. Here's a weather unit. This is a little hard to see because the Mannheim stamp is on top of it, but this is a weather station. These are fairly common. Here's a drop mail. This one is a smudge, but the rose-colored vertical bar is from L42, These are hard to find. Something like this is going to go for 1,000, 2,000 euros, maybe more than that, in an auction in Europe. They're hard to get a hold of. You can collect the London Raiders. So here's a letter from the commander of L12 and L30, whatever that's, it's behind somebody, L32, I believe it is. This is Peterson. This is from Peterson to his wife, who's living in Berlin. Now, this one doesn't have a commando cancel, but it's got the supporting troop cancel. This is a much larger one. This is a large format envelope also. These are very attractive in exhibits because you usually have such pretty writing. So this is a guy dropping bombs. Here are the Brits on the ground with the searchlights trying to find the Zeppelins overhead. And so this could be a propaganda card, or this is a British military card. And in addition to searchlights, you could find postcards of artillery pieces and airships and all whatever the British were using to down these things. Here's the Eastern Front. This is in Lithuania, and it's prominently declared down below the name of the city. Today it's known as Kaunas. I don't know how to pronounce it in their language, but again, easy to determine what it is. Here's the Balkan Front, and this is Germany, Greece, Bulgaria, Turkey. This is L-59. This is an amazing ship. This ship was one of the largest ships built during the war. It was purposely built with 2 extra sections inside of it to make it exceptionally long so they could put extra hydrogen inside of it. And often these ships had German East Africa. The German troops in East Africa were running out of medical supplies and running out of ammunition. And so they loaded this big airship with as much as they could put inside of it to fly it all the way to German East Africa. And it actually started out and got about halfway there, and the Germans were essentially run over by the Brits, and so they sent a message and said, "Don't bother, we're not going to be here to pick up the supplies you're sending," and they turned around and went back. This is the book that details this and other expeditions. This is a 40,000 kilometer Zeppelin war flight. It's significant because the total distance without stopping from Bulgaria to 2/3 of the way to Africa and back was greater than the distance from Berlin to New York. So in 1917, they were able to develop ships that were able to fly as far as the great German commercial ships later on, like the Graf Zeppelin and the Hindenburg. You can collect British propaganda. Here's a stylized shoot down of a Zeppelin. Over here is a British pilot, Robinson. Robinson is his name. He got a VC, Victoria Cross, for shooting down a Zeppelin. Here's German propaganda. L-19. This is a Zeppelin. It got shot down. Excuse me. It went down due to mechanical failure in the Black Sea. Here's a sailor clinging to it. A British trawler came along, and the British trawler captain, there was a captain and 3 crewmen in this trawler, and clinging to this gas bag were 14 Germans. And the trawler guy was afraid to pick them up and rescue them because he figured they would overpower him and they would take his boat. So he turned around and went away, and the 15 German sailors in L-19 all perished. And when this finally came into the press, the German propaganda machine made a pretty big thing of it. Here's one of those ships that was converted from civilian to military use. You can see the propaganda stamp in the center. God Will Punish England. And in the in the magenta colored one in the top center, you can see it has a name. It's a Hansa. Hansa was a commercial ship that the German military took over according to their mobilization plan. This is interesting. On the back, this is or the front of the postcard. This is a picture taken from that civilian turned into a military ship, and down below is the commander's stamp for that, the Luftship Kommando Hansa. And this is a photograph that was actually taken on that ship, or that's what the postcard says anyway. So after World War I, as I mentioned, German airships given to the victors. The United States, Great Britain, France, and Italy all got ships. So you can collect in the German military, and then were turned over to the victors. Here's the one that was given to the United States. They built this just for the United States. It's ZR number 3, and this is from Friedrichshafen. And you can see over on the left-hand side is a picture of this. It's essentially a military ship that was built. It's built after the war for the United States to military specifications to fly to the United States. It was turned over to the United States Navy and recommissioned as the USS Los Angeles. And so you can collect Los Angeles covers. Here are some good resources. These are general resources. Gottstroff, England by Nigel Parker. 3 volumes, about 1,500 pages. Great pictures, very extensive. And the standard is called The Zeppelin in Combat, which was written by Douglas Robinson, Brit. These are both Brits. Unfortunately, his book only covers Navy ships. Nigel Parker's covers all types of ships. For a single book that has the best airships list in it, that lists everything built by everybody and all the numbers, is this one by Greel and Dressel. And inside are just tables. They're a little hard to see here, but as you read from left to right, on the left, or the leftmost column, is the manufacturer's number. The next column is the military designation. And then across, it tells you when it was built, how big it is, what happened to it, who the commanders were, when it got shot down, or when it was deflated. This is, whenever I get a cover, this is the first book I go to. There are standard philatelic catalogs that in the United States, most Americans don't even bother with these sections. But if you live overseas, this is Mikkel. This is an English version, but there are German versions also. And on the back, you can see that it has a synopsis of Army and Navy airships. So there's a whole series in there that most Americans don't bother with. But these are, it's LZ-18 to LZ-114 that are listed in this catalog. And it's pretty good. The standard for most Zeppelin people is the Seeger, and it's not as good as the Mikkel, but you can see here in the 3.0 are the war airships. And there's 40 pages of information in here that are just devoted to the cancels and the ships. It's not nearly as complete, but it's a good place to start. Unfortunately, it's only in German. The real comprehensive source is written by Jürgen Schneevogt, and he authored 5 books. They're softbound, but they cover everything. And in here, you can find, he catalogs the different kind of cancels that we were just looking at. So this is a way I can take a cover, look in here, and it'll tell me which ship it belongs to and when it was issued, and it even gives some forms of rarity inside here. And it covers all the ships. The 4 types I showed you are all covered in here. There are three good Facebook sites. The one that Cheryl Gantz runs, of course, is focused mostly on the commercial Zeppelins, but there's a lot of military stuff in there also. Alistair Reed, who's in Norway, runs one called Airships, Dirigibles, and Blimps, and there's quite a bit of military stuff in there. Ray Reimel, I'm not sure where Ray is. I think he's someplace in Great Britain. I'm on all these sites, and I post stuff frequently. Ray has written several books on Zeppelin operations over London, and he runs his own. These are all private Facebooks, but just dial him up and send a note that you'd like to be a member. So I find it helpful to give some idea what's this stuff cost. Well, the seals, feld postcards, and the propaganda cards, it's the price of a fast food breakfast sandwich. Pieces with mostly postcards and some envelopes with clear support unit cancels. That's maybe an evening meal at a chain restaurant. If you went to Wendy's or Olive Garden or something. A commando numbered ship cancel. These are a little harder to come by. That might be a nice restaurant meal for two. And those usually get through auctions. Drop mail, that's 3 nights in the Hilton Hotel. They're really hard to find. And it's easy to buy large lots. I buy lots through London and several of the German auction houses. And if I buy 20 or 40 at a time, even these expensive ones will run maybe 40 or 50 bucks a piece. So where do you find this stuff? I use Philosearch to search for auctions. It's really good. And the auction houses I'm usually ending up with are Felsman, and they've been selling the Seeger material, Palmer, and Siegel. On eBay in the US and Germany, you can find some of the stuff. That's that which appears on the US eBay, I find overpriced. I use a couple German dealers to get stuff from. They'll send me, and they'll email me a picture of what they have and ask me if I'm interested. Increasingly, dealers at US shows are beginning to pick up some of this material. And it's always fun to just sit and talk with them. So turning now to another media, if you're a Mel Brooks Blazing Saddles fan as I am, this is a vamp a parody made of a German singer at the time. And the singer that she's vamping is Marlene Dietrich, who before World War II moved and had a second very successful film and singing career in the United States. Marlene Dietrich is the niece of Max Dietrich, who was the commander of L7, L18, L21, and L34, and her uncle was shot down and perished in the shoot down of L34. If you're interested in films, more of the Back to the Future type, and Marty McFly, you might run across something like this. This is a Back to the Future. This looks like just a common a piece of military mail. Here on the left is a Marine detachment cancel, one of the supporting units. So who cares? Well, clear down here in the left corner is an important instructor in World War I who was teaching these brand new pilots how to fly these things. Here's one from Ernst Lehman. Ernst was a commander of the Hindenburg. So in World War I, he's commanding LZ-120. He's a captain flying around. And here's his cancel in this case, he addressed it to his girlfriend, who later Helmich, who later became his wife. So looking even instead of back to the future, forward to the future, in this year in 2025, the Military Postal History Society is a convening society, and those of us who work in this military area are planning on doing some presentation and getting some exhibits together. In 2026 at Boston International, similarly, those of us who have this strange disease plan to participate in the German Philatelic Society Salon that includes representation from Europe, and we're going to focus on international cooperation as part of the collaboration crew. So this is not a one-shot deal, and I hope to be able to tie together what I know about these things to be able to write a monograph that the Military Postal History Society has agreed to publish. Okay, so I'm a flight instructor. The worst thing that can happen to a flight instructor is to run out of airspeed and ideas at the same time, and that's what just happened to me. So it's time for me to stop talking, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Here's my contact information. If you'd like to pursue any of this, or if you have some of this material and you'd like me to comment on it, or you've got more knowledge about this covers in some of these areas and you can tell I can learn a lot, get a hold of me. That's my cell phone number and that's my email.
Fred, thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. I don't know if other people got as much out of it as I did, but I mean, I see a bunch of these covers, and well, first of all, because I can't read German, but it was difficult for me to tell the difference between the different manufacturers and what were supporting organizations versus stuff that you're actually in the squadron. That was wonderful. I want to encourage you and anyone who's on the call to write for the Air Post Journal. We're always looking for articles related to aviation, and this would certainly be a topic that we would welcome. Any comments or questions for Fred?
No questions, but I found it very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's neat stuff. Well, while he was talking, I went over to Abe's books and I was looking for Zeppelin, with the exclamation point after it, and everything that came up said Led Zeppelin on it. But I'm going to keep my eye out for it because I mean that book. If you could have one book on military Zeppelins, that would be really useful because you pick up some cover and you want to be able to say something about it, and there it's got that paragraph and it tells you exactly what happened to it. So what a perfect book. So now I'm gonna keep my eye out for that. Anybody else?
Is that book a Stairway to Heaven then maybe?
Yeah. It was written by Jimmy Page. I don't know who that is. Okay, well, we've just passed the top of the hour. I want to thank you all for coming. We had a nice turnout. Thank you all, and we hope to see you next month.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Bye.